Hi, this is Nick Katko from BMA, and welcome to today's webinar on improving accounts payable. Before we get started, I wanted to do a quick technical check. Hold on, I'm doing this solo today. My colleague Mike is not here. Please in the chat panel, let me know if you can see the presentation, if you can hear me, and if you can see me. Okay, great. I got a couple of responses. Thank you very much. All right, so since I'm flying solo today, the technical aspects of doing polling questions and all that, just please be a little bit patient. All right, so let me close that. All right, so again, the sort of the administrative technical aspects. If you have any questions during the webinar, please put them in the question panel, excuse me, and I'll try to get to some questions at the end. There is a copy of the presentation in the handout section of your control panel, and you can download it. If by some chance you don't do that, or if you're watching the recording of the webinar, please send me an email and I'll be glad to send you a copy of the presentation. If you are a certified public accountant and you would like to get 1 hour of continuing education credit for attending this live webinar, you have to respond to the 3 attendance check questions, stay logged in for 50 minutes, and then afterwards, send me an email. I'll be glad to send you a certificate. So that takes care of all the housekeeping. Now let's move on to the actual presentation. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is lean thinking for accounts payable. We probably could spend a whole hour just talking about lean thinking, but just a quick overview of what is lean thinking, why is it important, what does it mean to serve as sort of a foundation for improving accounts payable. We're going to talk about how do you study the accounts payable process. This is really how you get started improving accounts payables. You don't just jump in and dive and start improvements. You got to know, what are the problems and issues, and how does the process perform today? And then that gives you an idea of what to work on in terms of improving. Then we're going to talk about error proofing, which is improving quality, which over the course of my career and working with companies is I found it's sort of like the #1 problem that accounts payable deals with, which is, anything that is incorrect on an invoice. Then we're going to talk about daily lean management, which is on a daily basis, how should accounts payable be managed using a lean thinking approach. And while that might sound a little bit counterintuitive, we know how to run accounts payable. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is using daily lean management practices and tools and routines sort of creates what I like to call a lean classroom every day, where you're understanding the process, you're learning about the process, you're learning more about what's wrong with the problems and issues, and also how to make improvements. And then I'm going to give you some sort of areas to look at that are possible sources of improvements. Again, a lot of this is based on what we've done over the years in working with companies. Then we'll wrap up and hopefully take some questions. A lot of what, or the whole approach to this webinar and really the whole Practicing Lean Accounting book is that this is based on our experience. What are the problems and issues that we have seen in accounts payable? And one reason we wanted to do this webinar is introducing lean thinking into accounting. Accounts payable is a good place to really begin because you're processing transactions on a daily basis. So there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of data, and it serves sort of like a learning laboratory for how lean thinking can work in accounting. Okay, so lean thinking for accounts payable. What's really important to understand here is that improving accounts payable or improving any accounting process is not just doing things. It's not, and there really is no end. It's not like we're going to do something, we're going to make improvements, and then we're finished. It's a thinking process, okay, and it's also practicing. So lean thinking, is a people-centered learning and improvement strategy for an organization. Here's the key aspects. It's about people, and it's about people learning and people making improvements. It's grounded in, continuous improvement and respect for people. I know in accounting literature out there today, there's a lot of discussion about, automating accounting and artificial intelligence. And, I'm not really talking about that aspect of this. This is about what people do and how people can improve a process. I'll make a little editorial comment here because actually I was talking to a company about this last week. If you automate a process, if you use software to automate a process to do tasks that people usually do, if there is waste in that process, there is going to be waste in the automation. The waste, the software doesn't eliminate the waste. So that's very important to understand. So it's important for accounts payable team members and everyone in accounting, to understand that lean is not something that we just do. It is something that we practice. It is a way to think. It is a way to act. But we want to get away from sort of the transactional nature of accounting. If you work in accounts payable, you're processing transactions. We have deadlines to meet. We got to get the weekly check run out. And so we think about deadlines all the time. And so there can be a tendency, I'm not saying this happens, but there can be a tendency for, accounting people, accounting employees who really don't understand lean that well to think, oh, well, this is just something we're going to do for a while. So focus on the thinking. And, what do we need to understand? What do accounts payable teams need to understand? What do the customers need from the process? Now, that is not entirely oblivious to accounts payable. We know we have to pay the bills on time. That's obvious. There's also a service aspect to accounts payable, is that, when there are problems and issues, like with a supplier, with a vendor, how well do we resolve, how fast and how easy is it to resolve those problems and issues to the customer's satisfaction? Okay, so that's the service aspect of it. It's not just performing the transaction. Then, then there's also just sort of the ease of interaction. How easy is it for the accounts payable customers to work with accounts payable? So we have to understand what the customers want and need, and then we have to understand everything that's getting in the way of that, which is waste, or everything that does not contribute to that delivering of value. And we need to eliminate the waste. And if it doesn't contribute to delivering value, we need to minimize that effort there. So the best way to approach improving accounts payable in any accounting process is to think of it as a series of practices. And now, and a good analogy is to think about, your any personal experience that you may have had, whether it's, playing a sport, learning how to play a musical instrument, even our education. If you're an accountant, if you're a CPA, learning about accounting, learning about any subject in school, you learn something by practicing. And at one level, you never stop practicing. So, if I don't play any musical instruments, but if I played the guitar, I would learn how to play the guitar. I would, achieve some level of mastery, but then I would probably still continue to play, and that playing is actually practice. So there are 4 practices. Let me put them up here. We have to understand value. What do our customers want? And what is it they want and expect from accounts payable? That has to be front and center, first and foremost, in the way accounts payable approaches its work and the way people think about what the priorities are. Second, identify waste. Okay, there's 3 types of activities that go on, that can occur in any accounting process, any process at all. From a lean viewpoint, value-added activities. These are the activities that are absolutely necessary to deliver the value. There are non-value added but necessary activities, which are think of those as the business type activities that have to be performed for a specific reason. And then there's the waste. And wasteful activities can be eliminated without any harm to the customer. And every activity, whether it's a specific process step or whether it's the tasks involved to complete a process step, can be categorized in one of the 3 ways. So, for example, from the customer's viewpoint, in accounts payable, the only value-added activity is them receiving the correct payment on time. From a customer's viewpoint, they don't have any interest in understanding how your accounts payable process works. They don't understand, they don't really care about problems and issues. They just want their payment on time. And so, for the most part, all the steps that go on in accounts payable are non-value added but necessary. You have to, for example, process an invoice. You have to get some approvals on invoices, things like that. So again, from the customer's viewpoint, they're non-value added, but necessary. So the question is really, how lean are those processes? Then there's waste. For example, defects, missing or incorrect information on an invoice. Okay, so, we just need to try to figure out a way to eliminate the defects, and that creates more time to focus on everything else. We want to measure using lean performance measures. Accounts payable is more than just paying the bills on time. That's what the customers want, but we need to be able to monitor how the process performs on an ongoing basis to know if we can accomplish that or not. We don't want to wait till the end to measure ourselves. We want to be continually measuring. Then there's the plan, do, check, and adjust framework. So this is the scientific method, and it's sort of the foundation of lean thinking and lean improvement and lean problem solving. So it's the way we think, okay? And it's also the steps to solve problems. And I'm going to give you some examples of this. So those are the 4 practices that you want to put in place. Now this has to be done sort of at the accounts payable process level, but also everyone on the accounts payable team needs to sort of be able to understand, to live these practices on a daily basis. And I'm going to show you how to make that happen. So what is the waste? Let me put them all up here. If you've attended any of our previous webinars where we talk about waste in accounting, you'll remember that we use the acronym downtime. That's an easy way to understand the 8 wastes. And you can see on the left, the first letter of each of the different types of waste spells out the acronym downtime. Okay, so defects, missing or incorrect information. I'll go out on a limb here, safe to say that this is probably the #1 issue in most account payable processes, and it causes a lot of the problems. The interesting thing about defects is it creates a lot of other waste. For example, if you have a defect on an invoice, you now have to wait for that defect to be corrected. Overproduction is too much information. This may or may not occur in accounts payable. We've seen it some. This is where maybe you're sending too much information to someone who has to approve an invoice, or maybe you're sending some extraneous information along with the accounts payable payment. Waiting, that's very prevalent in a lot of accounts payable processes. These are some examples. Basically, there's a lot of waiting time where you're waiting on an approval, you're waiting on invoices, expense reports, things like that. Here's the issue inside accounts payable. So there's a defect on an invoice, so I have to wait on someone to get back to me to correct that invoice. So that defect is waiting, but me personally, I can work on other things. So this waiting time sort of is not thought of as waste because I can stay busy. But we want to decrease all those waiting times. Neglect of talent is sort of where you have people performing manual steps that maybe within the current system that you use, there might be some ways to eliminate some of those tasks. I'm not talking about full automation, but sometimes there's features within payable systems which sort of just cut out a little bit of work. Transportation is the unnecessary of handoffs of information to and from accounts payable. So if, for example, you have an invoice that needs to be approved, and you have to send that invoice for approval, that's a handoff. Now, again, these are unnecessary handoffs, okay? Inventory, think of this as batch processing. The weekly check run. Maybe you have a surge of invoices. So, a lot of invoices come in at the end of the month or at the beginning of the month from all your suppliers, and you have to deal with that surge. Motion is unnecessary searching of information. The term we use is information safaris, trying to find information you need. And then excess processing, an example of that would be unnecessary approvals. All right, so next thing we're going to do is polling question number 1. So I need to do some administrative things here. So I'm going to put the polling question up. If you are again, this is primarily for certified public accountants who want CPE. So if you want that, please answer the question. So I'm going to launch the poll. These are not any trick questions. This is the minimum amount of work that has to be done to meet the continuing education requirements. So I'll give you about 10 seconds more to, all right. It looks like everybody's voted. I'm going to close the poll. I'm not going to share the results. And we are going to continue on with the presentation. So how do you get started? Okay, that's always one of the questions about improving any process in accounting. The best way to do it is to study, okay? Because again, you want to understand how the process is performing. You want to understand what the problems and issues are. You don't want to just dive in and thrash around and try to figure out what to improve. You want any effort you make on improvement, you want it to be methodical, planned, and beneficial. So how do you get started? Let's collect some data. Well, first of all, understand your process. This is just a simple graphic of how most accounts payable processes work. There might be some specific steps in your process, but think of it as 2 separate sub-processes. One is the invoice processing. Okay, so that is getting invoices into the system so they can be paid. Got to get them set up for payment. This is a daily process. It's ongoing. It's continuous. Okay, there might be certain times of a month where it's busier than others. Sorry, I got a little spot on my glasses. Then there's the payment processing, which think of this as what is commonly called the weekly check run. Of course, that can be done electronically these days, but periodically, usually once a week, the invoices that are due are being paid. So, you want to collect the data on both parts of the process. The way to collect data is to use some basic lean performance measurements. What you want to do, here's sort of like a little trick to improving any accounting process. Turn it into numbers. Okay, you could sit in a conference room and talk about the process and talk about the problems and issues, and everybody can sort of say what they think the problems and issues are, but let's quantify it. Okay, we're accountants, we're finance people, we understand numbers that move in the right direction. So, collect the best data to collect is basic information on how the payables process works today. So on the left side, you see 7 categories of measurements. On the right side are some examples. Now, I'm not saying these are the ones you have to use. these are measures that we have used in the past, and we've heard other payable processes do this. All right, so what's the average processing time? Okay, from the time you receive an invoice to the time you set it up in accounts payable. How long does that take on average? You know, if you process employee expense reports, what is the on-time delivery of the expense report into accounts payable? Okay, that's probably not that high. I worked, in as CFO, and that was always one of the big issues is they don't get the expense reports in. Understand defects, missing or incorrect information. How many manual checks do you issue? That's a defect because it wasn't part of the regular check run. If you send invoices out for approval, what's the average approval turnaround time? If there is a dispute on a payment with a supplier, what's the average resolution time? Okay, what's the total time, also the total lead time from the time a request for payment is received to the time the payment is actually issued? Productivity, how many invoices are processed per hours worked? What's your late payment percentage to suppliers? What's missed? How many early payment discounts do you miss? Safety and morale, I'm not going to really worry too much about those because they're more on the people side, but collect some data. Okay, what's a good sample size? Collect data for a couple weeks maybe. That's all you got to do, and just see what the numbers say. So you don't have to decide exactly what that we're only going to do 3 or 4 measures. Just collect what you think might be useful, study it, and then you'll decide what the key measures are that you need to use going forward. But my only recommendation is don't over measure. You don't want to measure 15 or 20 things. If you can have 5 to 7 measurements, that's good. The next step is to go see where the waste is. So this is sort of a graphic representation of any process. You have an input, you have process steps, there's some output. So we receive an invoice, it gets processed, we eventually pay that invoice. Within each process steps, there are a lot of tasks. How do we perform the process step? What are the keystrokes to enter and the screens to use in the system to get the invoice entered? The issue is that the waste may not be thoroughly visible, okay? It sort of can be hidden in normal everyday activities, and that can create unevenness and also overburden. So the idea of go see is, go see the actual person in the actual place, do the actual work, okay? Don't sit in a conference room and just talk about it. Create some very, very simple form, and just write down the waste that you see. Okay, this is just an example. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to link the waste that we observe to the measurements. Okay, we're trying to create that linkage to get an understanding of where what's sort of the current state of accounts payable. So that's basically what you need to do to collect data on accounts payable to understand what your problems and issues are. So now let's talk about improving. So the first thing I want to talk about is what's called error proofing. As I mentioned earlier, defects inside accounts payable is typically, in my 30-year career of lean accounting, is like the number one issue in most account payable departments. So, if you think about a defect as missing or incorrect information, and if you look at a typical invoice, which I have on the screen here, there's a great deal of information, and if any of it is incorrect, it has the potential to stop the processing of the invoice. It could be the bill to, it can be the address, it could be the name of the company, it could be invoice numbers, purchase order numbers, it could be, what's on the invoice, the quantity, the price, things like that. It could be the terms and conditions. So there's a lot of information, okay? And the defect may occur inside your company. For example, the purchase order could be incorrect. It could also occur outside your company, meaning maybe the supplier created a defect inadvertently. What's important to understand about defects is they're inadvertent and unintentional, and it's important to study them to learn how we can possibly prevent them. And that's what the idea of error proofing is. It's building a quality system. So there's 3 steps to error proofing. Number 1 is be able to detect, it's a tongue twister, be able to detect defects rapidly. So measure defects on a daily basis. And on a daily basis, try to get a basic understanding of what the cause is. Okay, we know that this is wrong, but why do we think it occurred? Okay, get this in place. This is really about learning, okay? Because the more that you can develop, the more that you study the defects and understand the root causes, you'll develop some trends that can be focused on making improvements. The second step is reduce the effect of the defects that occur. You have to have a standard response to resolve defects, okay? And think of this as a lean response. How do we go from pushing? For example, if I'm in accounts payable, I have a defect, I attach it to an email and I send it to someone. I said, hey, I need some help on this. And then I wait, okay? And maybe I get a fast response, maybe I don't. But that's sort of like the push system. So how can you have standard responses and maybe even a standard time to resolve defects, okay? Because we want to minimize the impact that defect has. Because again, the whole defect resolution process is waste, okay? So you got to think of it that way. And then the third step is how do we prevent defects from occurring? So number 1 and number 2, detecting the defects and reducing the effect of the defects that occur. You collect a lot of data and you learn about the root causes, and from there you can start to put improvements in place to prevent the defect from occurring, like fail safes. Or if you can't prevent the defect from occurring, how can you detect the defect as close to the source as possible? Because if the defect gets into accounts payable sort of is at the end of the procure to pay process. So how can we put more quality checks up front to prevent the defect from being discovered in accounts payable? Okay, time for polling question number. All right, I'm going to close the poll. Let me just, I got a quick question. Have you been able to hear me the whole time? Just somebody in the question just say, yeah, or was I muted for some reason? Okay, I just wanted to check. I mean, when you're doing these webinars by yourself, funny things can happen. Okay. Next step is to establish daily lean management practices in accounts payable. As I mentioned earlier, think of this as the accounts payable classroom, okay? Where on a daily basis in the course of the normal work activities, you're practicing lean thinking and you're learning about problems and issues. So what are the steps? Again, this is a PDCA cycle, okay? Daily lean management follows plan, do, check, adjust. So what's the plan is what by when. So what do we have to get done today to deliver value to our customers? How are we going to execute the work? And most importantly, how are we going to have real-time responses to problems and issues as they occur? Because as much as we like to think about lean as eliminating waste and eliminating problems and issues, it does a good job of that, but it doesn't make everything disappear. And sort of another aspect of lean is we want to eliminate, but we also need to learn how to deal with problems in a more effective manner. The check is understanding how did we do today, or how did we do yesterday? We use lean measurements for that. And then the adjust piece is how do we get better? Now, the daily lean management practice is, over the years in working with accounting, we usually recommend putting this in place first rather than diving into a lot of maybe complex continuous improvements, because we study the data, okay, so we get some idea of how the process runs, what the process issues are, but how can we also learn more on a daily basis what problems and issues are? So think about, we talk about having a daily huddle, okay, as a routine. And the daily huddle, and you're going to see a visual board, is sort of the format of the daily huddle, and the format of the visual board really encompasses the PDCA aspect of daily lean management. So what's the plan for today? All right, so what do we need to know? We need to know capacity and we need to know demand. Demand is what work do we have to get done to meet our customer needs today? Okay. Now that could be processing, that could be, it doesn't have to be we have 80 invoices to process. It may be we have to complete the invoices that came in today, we have to complete processing. It could be something like that. But what we want to do is we want to prioritize demand based on our available capacity. So, capacity is, how many people are in accounts payable? They work 8 hours a day. Okay, we can calculate how much time that is, but we only use 80% of that capacity because you want to leave 20% as a buffer for unexpected problems and issues, for things like meeting or the phone calls that go on. So you never schedule to 100% of capacity. You sort of balance it And so that might be prioritizing what work gets done when. And if certain work can't get done today, maybe it goes into the backlog and has to get done tomorrow. How did we do? Those are the daily lean measurements. Okay, and you look at how we did yesterday. Did we complete all the work, schedule attainment? What were the defects? And by reviewing the measures, they tell you the problems and issues that you encountered. From there, you do an initial root cause analysis. Why do we think these problems occurred? We're not necessarily trying to solve that problem. We just want us to understand, what do we think the cause is? And in here, you want to also understand the difference between noise and a trend. I mean, sometimes things just go wrong. Do we think it's a trend? No. Then the question is, how do we address these problems? Do we put in a short-term countermeasure? How do we deal with this and sort of unstick it? Or if this is a trend, do we need to go into process improvement and study the problem a little more and maybe make some structural process changes to eliminate the cause? So that's PDCA on a daily basis. The other tool is a visual board. Now, you may have some of these in place, and again, you want to set the visual board up, the PDCA framework. What's the plan? Okay, what's our daily schedule? Make it visual. If what work has to get done, what's the backlog? Have a visual signal of the status of the work. What's in process? Where is it? What are the current problems and issues? The check, make sure your lean performance measures are posted visually. You could do it in a graphical graph form. You could just do it by the numbers for the day, however you want to do it. Then the adjust is, what are the current problems and issues we have to deal with? What are the trends? And what are the status of the various improvements? The other aspect of daily lean management is, how do we respond to abnormal conditions? Okay, this is not, a lot of accounting processes or even administrative processes, sort of people just react to problems the way they want to, the way their experience tells them. What we're trying to do is develop some routines, okay, a standard response. So this could be at the employee level. What do I do if I'm behind? What do I do if I have a problem or an issue? Okay. So, what are what can create abnormalities? Number one is unplanned demand. Okay. Work comes, something happens and this has to get done before this, and it wasn't planned. So how do we change that priority of demand? How do we adjust? The variability of processing times. For example, in accounting, not every invoice is created equally. Some are more complex than others. So you may open an invoice and, oh, this is a complex invoice, it's going to take longer. So how do we deal with that? You can also have unexpected changes in capacity. For example, I might be working in accounts payable and, for some reason I'm getting pulled out of my work for an unexpected 3-hour meeting. Then there's the process waste. What do we do when we encounter waste? So for example, if there's a defect, what do? Do I stop and fix that defect? Do I put the defect aside and continue processing and then come back later to fix the defect? Or, do we have one person in accounts payable that their whole job today is just working on defects? Think of this as understanding variability. when I work with companies, sometimes I explain it this way. There's a lot of variability in an accounting process, and you can eliminate it or you can manage it. And so, these abnormal conditions are indicators of variability. So how are you gonna manage this? And how do people know how to manage this? What we want to get to is, we want to get away in daily lean management. We want to get away from firefighting to fire prevention. Okay. Accountants are very good at firefighting, resolving the issues and making sure that everything gets done by deadlines. We want to move away from that. Okay. And that's what daily lean management does for us. The other important piece of daily lean management is, it reveals the problems and issues. It reveals opportunities for improvement. So, simple problems and issues, you can sort of just improve through your daily work. Quick wins of what we call daily PDCA. The more complex problems and issues, you could do through process improvement, which we're going to be talking about here in a second. But first, I have to do the third polling question. All right, I'm going to close the poll. Thanks for doing that. All right, so we've got a few slides here. We're getting towards the end. Again, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of, sort of improvement opportunities to look for in accounts payable. A lot of this is based on experience that we have had with companies that we've worked with over the years. So the first thing is approvals. Now, approvals are good internal accounting controls, okay? We're not disputing that, but they could become excessive, okay? Because sometimes, and for example, I worked with a company last year that their invoices required 4 approvals. Now, the reason it required 4 approvals is because when there were fewer approvals, those approvers were not really doing their job, so they put in more checks to make sure that the first level of a second level of approvers and third level of approvers were checking the first level of approvers if they were doing their job. That's waste, okay? So there might be opportunities to decrease the number of approvals. I mean, if your company policy has 1 approval at this dollar value and then 2 approvals at this dollar value, if you have more than that, why do you have more than that? You can also standardize approver activities. Approving an invoice is not exactly a high priority of someone not in accounts payable. And you might send the invoice out for approval, and one of the reasons it's waiting there is because that manager, they have other things they have to do. Okay, and maybe they have a lot of work they have to do to understand. I mean, some invoices are complex. Maybe they don't know what the invoice was about, and they have to go talk to somebody about it. Did this really happen? So, look at the approver activities. This is a go see thing, and maybe you can eliminate some steps there. The 3-way match is, it's ideally designed, for good internal accounting controls, but it's full of waste, okay? Because, there's errors on the purchase order. In receiving, the team doing the receiving, they're usually swamped, and they're not really always checking everything they need to check. And so even though it's designed to work well, it rarely works well. So again, look at the waste in that process, and also decrease handoffs. Okay, so can you pre-approve recurring invoices? Can you create dollar thresholds, meaning if a typical invoice is this much and there's a range, if it's within this range, it's automatically approved. If it's outside of that range, then it goes for approval. There's a lot of little tricks that you can do to sort of, if you can decrease the handoff, you can process the invoice faster. Then there's decreasing batching. Okay. If you hold accounts payable open to get invoices for accrual purposes, a lot of those invoices, if they're recurring, just post them in the invoice in the period that they're received. Unless, there's materiality there. If invoices have to be sent out, for either, can you level load the processing of the invoices? We may receive a big batch in the first week of the month, but, can we release them because they might be, some might be paid in 10 days, some might be in 30 days. Talk to your suppliers, change the dates. Okay, there's nothing magical about month end. Okay, if a supplier sends an invoice once a month, can they send it in the middle of the month? The other thing is make sure that all the invoices come into accounts payable. Okay, sometimes if I'm a supplier and I'm working with this part of your company, I'll just send the invoice to the person I know. Within payment processing, okay, if you have to approve the check run after you've approved the invoice for payment, why? If it's for cash management purposes, that's probably somewhat valid. If it's not for cash management purposes, might be waste. Waiting for people to sign checks. Now, if you still do that, that's sometimes a problem. Decreasing manual checks, and then move to electronic payments. And finally, you can always focus on transformative improvements, which are listed here. All right, so wrapping up. I have to pause the presentation just for a moment. Okay, I'm back. Sorry for that. I just had to deal with something in a text message. All right, so here's sort of some wrap up practical advice. I'd say accounts payable is more than paying the bills. Okay, think about the service aspect of accounts payable. How do you deal with all the other requests from your suppliers or from any of your customers? And focus on that. Understand that a lot of the waste may be hidden in normal, everyday work routines. A lot of the non-value added but necessary work. Measure. I can't stress enough. Put in some, basic lean performance measurements to measure the process. when you quantify it, it's going to be easier for everyone to understand what the problems and issues are, what's the impact of improvements. And like I mentioned, PDCA, daily lean management. This is, I repeat this a lot, it's like a lean classroom. Get this in place. And if you can do these things, if you could just get daily lean management in place in accounts payable, that's an excellent start on the lean accounting transformation. You don't have to jump towards those transformational improvements about, complete automation, things like that. Get the people engaged, get them thinking, get them learning, and you'll see a lot of progress. I can't stress enough that even if people don't have a whole lot of lean experience, they typically know the problems and issues. They may not be able to articulate the problems and issues. And if you create, this daily lean management system, it's a forum to talk about problems and issues. It's a forum for people to show that they can make improvements, and they get a lot of satisfaction out of that. Okay, just a couple things. Wrapping up, we have some lean accounting events coming up. We have an online course beginning next Tuesday, value stream management. And then in November, we're going to be doing solving the standard costing problem. They're on our events page on the website. You want to, if you have any interest in registering, all you have to do is contact me and we'll take care of the registration. The Lean Accounting Community Chat is the third Wednesday of every month at 11 o'clock US Eastern Time. You can register once and then you have the link to attend every one. And those are fun and enjoyable. And then don't forget, we have some upcoming webinars. It's the second Wednesday of every month. They're on our events page, but if you want to see here's the registration links. You can register for them. As usual, all our events are recorded, and as long as you register, you get a link. Okay, that sort of wraps things up. I don't see any questions. I'll just wait to see if anybody has any. Okay. All right, so I'd like to thank you for attending the webinar. If you registered for this webinar that was originally supposed to be, I think, on September 8th, thank you for being patient with 2 reschedules, and hope to see you soon at one of our other lean accounting events. So have a good day. If you want continuing education credit, send me an email. And if by some chance you need a copy of the presentation, also send me an email. Have a good day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.